Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you might be joining us from. Welcome to the webinar, Make Procurement Your Value Merchant. My name is Jens Henschel. I'm going to be your coach and presenter for today's session. Thank you very much for taking 1 hour out of your busy schedule and to be spending that time with us and covering such an important topic that is so close to my heart, namely, how can you make procurement your value merchant? For those people that don't know me, I've been 20 years in procurement and I've been on your buyer side, on your customer side as a buyer for many, many years. And how to build that bridge between suppliers and customers, obviously something that is very close to my heart. So I'm really looking forward to give this presentation here to you. So let's have a quick look on what we have prepared for you in today's session. First of all, I would like to look into procurement's KPIs. Obviously, the topic of today is how can we make procurement your value merchant? How can we, change the conversation from price to value? And to do this, we want to understand the buyer. We want to understand procurement a little bit better. And what best way to do that than to look into how they actually being assessed? What are their performance targets? And we'll do that in the first agenda point here today. Then we need to talk about value. It's such an inflationary term, right? And I feel everybody's using it, but nobody really is defining what really lies behind it. So I would like to spend some time with you to come up with a clear definition what value is all about, so that in the last agenda point, we can bring this all together, namely, how can we use the understanding that we've created about procurement, about the buyer on your customer side, into how they actually see value and assess value that we create as a supplier, and how can we turn that into a conversation from price to that value that we're offering as their suppliers. We also have some time towards the end for some questions and hopefully my good answers. So again, as I said, please put all your questions already in chat early so that Ivan can consolidate them for us. Okay, before I get going, just a quick introduction about ourselves. FIVIS, we are a training company based here in London. All of our trainers and coaches have a procurement background. We've all been, as many of you might say, on the dark side all of our careers, but that's exactly what we want to offer and activate actually in the trainings that we do with suppliers and sales organizations such as yourself, namely to activate the voice of your customer, to activate the voice of procurement in these training. We want to train you on the skills and competencies on how we can build winning relationships with that counterpart on the customer side so that you can drive value sustainably and profitably. And our motto is, the reason why we founded this company, quite frankly, is we want to build bridges between procurement and sales. There's so much value that just gets lost because both sides don't know how to interact with each other, and that's what we solve for. But enough about us. Let's talk about how we can turn that price conversation, that dreaded price conversation that you most often might have with your customer, into a value conversation. And I would like to start with the elephant in the room. I'm pretty sure that most of you on the sales side, when you signed up for this webinar, had one particular point that went through your head, namely, Jens, procurement cares only about price. What are you talking about? How can we even, imagine to turning these guys from price to value? The conversation that I'm having with a buyer all the time is only about price and how that price can be reduced even further. So how can you make that assumption that, these guys are about value at all? And obviously, I do believe that there is much more than the buyer is focused on than just price. But instead of me just saying it and you believing me, let's work out together why buyers are actually much more or have much more focus areas than just price. And I would like to ask you a question that I want you to think of, namely, what gets the buyer fired? If you just think of the buyer that you're interacting with on a daily basis on your customer side, what would make them lose their job effectively? And I give you two scenarios for you to contemplate. Scenario number one, the buyer reports back a 16% price increase to the CFO after multiple negotiation rounds with the supplier, incurring a financial hurt of $500,000 to the business. So is that one scenario, one reason why your buyer, why procurement might be losing their job? Or scenario B, supplier ABC has failed to deliver their products to the customer's plant. Production lines on the customer side had to stop since there was no implementable recovery plan in place. The customer subsequently had to cancel orders with their retailers, which led to lost shelf space and ultimately lower market share. So put into chat now if you think that procurement or a buyer on your customer side loses their job more because of, well, they delivered, a financial hurt because of a negotiation that has gone haywire, or is it because, they failed in making sure that supply is always there 100%? So I'm looking at the chat. I think everybody has consistently said B, and that's absolutely the case. But in most cases, people think that the pricing conversation, or the price, is the most important element for the buyer, which is absolutely not the case, right? Obviously, it's not good news if I deliver a 500,000 hurt that was not in the budget back to my CFO. But the biggest concern for my business is that we don't receive the product that you're producing. And this might be a little bit of a different to what you're doing on a daily basis as sales professionals. You are being targeted heavily and assessed heavily on the commercials, whilst the buyers also personally accountable for the supplies that they're bringing to the business. So if you have been brought into the business based on what I have recommended as the buyer to my superiors, and you are not performing in line with what we had contractually agreed, I'll be personally on the hook and I might be losing my job. So even one failed delivery, even one issue on quality, even one outage in your production site could already trigger that internal conversation. What decision has the buyer been made? Is he or her, she or her, he or him, appropriate for that job? So keep that in mind. The other thing, what solidifies a little bit why procurement is more than just cost and price is procurement's 5 R's. And some of you might be aware of that terminology. It's pretty much a terminology that every procurement person is aware of. So if you mention the 5 R's with the procurement person that you're interacting with on your customer side, that's some procurement lingo that resonates with him. So keep that in mind. The procurement 5 R's is something that has been established by the big certifying bodies in the US and in Europe, SIPS and ISM, that certify procurement professionals. And what they did with the 5 R's is to define what the procurement function is all about. And the 5 R's say the following: procurement is to deliver the right quality, the right quantity, at the right place, in the right time, at the right price. And here you see again that most of these R's actually cover elements that are not commercial, that are linked to a supply chain and a supply chain setup and the relationship with you as the supplier, and not necessarily just the commercial terms. So keep this in mind. This is something very important, that the perception of the buyer is always, well, they only talk about price, so that's the reason why that's the only thing that they're interested in. Based on how they're being assessed and how they lose their job and what the certifying bodies say about procurement, the story is a little different. So with that being in mind, let's have a look then on how procurements are being assessed within their own organization. What are the actual KPIs? And I've prepared for you a little list here, an overview of the various KPIs that your buyers are being assessed against. So that's a overview of a scorecard that your buyer on your customer side might be having or might be living up to. And I don't want you to read all of this. You will get access to our white paper later in the presentation, where you will be able to download it and have it in front of you. So I don't want you to focus on the nitty-gritty detail. What I wanted to highlight here is that savings, so the conversation around price and the reduction of your price, is only on number 6 in this overview, in this prioritization of KPIs. And most sellers do, though, believe that the price is the most important that the buyer is pursuing. But again, the scorecard overview shows you that this is actually not the case. And the scorecard overview has been established by us consolidating a lot of surveys around what buyers say, what their KPIs are. So we can see that this is on average how the buyers are being assessed, namely price and savings is only on position number 6. So what we now want to derive from this overview, from this scorecard, is what are actually those focus areas that our buyer on the customer side is focusing on. And let me do that. Let's elaborate together now what these buckets are that your buyer is after. The first bucket, if we consolidate those KPIs and weight them accordingly, first are all about risk management. Similar to what we discussed before, their main concern is to manage risk with you, to manage supply, to assure supply, to make sure that what has been promised to be delivered will be delivered to their respective factories. The next element that they are focused on is benefits. How do we as a buyer create benefits for our business that we grow sales, we become more innovative, we create a competitive advantage in our respective industry? The next bucket, based on weights and prioritization of the KPIs, is cost. How do we make our organization more efficient? And the last element, the last bucket that the buyers concentrate on is price. So you can see that the order is probably completely different and upside down to what you would have expected in the conversation, the commercial conversation that you're having on a day-to-day basis with that procurement professional, where it might always be about price, but in reality, their concerns are more with risk, more with benefits, more with cost than with that price that you put in front of them. Risk and benefits are career defining. We obviously made that example early on. What gets the buyer fired? Obviously, if there's a supply disruption, that is where the buyer really will get a hard time internally. Also, a promotion to get to the next position in a company, the buyer is more after or needs to deliver more KPIs with regards to benefits than anything else. So these are really career defining focus areas for the buyer. Whilst cost and price are table stakes, are areas that are expected the buyer to deliver, but are not really defining their career. So to summarize, really, what is important to the buyer is risk, benefits, cost, and price. Now you might say, Jens, okay, I get this. This makes all good sense. I understand where you're coming from, and based on that scorecard, we can clearly see that price is not the most important topic. But why is it then? Why is it then that in the conversation that I'm having with the buyer on a daily basis, they are only interested in price? So we need to dig a little bit deeper to understand what's really going on there. And there's only 3 plausible explanations. And some of these explanations we're hearing from suppliers and sales managers very, very often. One explanation that we hear is, well, the reason why my buyer or my customer is only talking about price is because our product is such a commodity. If we were only to invent something new or customize our product a little better, then we as sales community would not be seen as such a commodity. And that's the reason why we would be able to talk more about value than about price. I'm not so sure if that's the case though. In my 20 years in procurement, to be honest with you, I've never been interacting with a supplier that had a pure commodity. If you are selling a pure commodity, please put it in the chat now. I would really love to see what a pure commodity is. I always, notice differences between supplier A and supplier B. There was always some value adds to be had. So a pure commodity, in my view, does not exist, and it does not exist in the procurement's perspective as well. So the reason why the buyer might be only talking about price cannot be necessarily linked to that particular issue. Another, reason that we always hear from sales managers is, well, the buyer doesn't get it. They do not simply understand that we as a supplier offer such, great value to them. There's so much value to be had, and it makes so much sense that our product is, helping them grow, helping them become more effective, efficient. Why does the buyer not see it? So this could be one reason. The other reason that your buyer is only talking about price is that, well, the buyer does get that you can deliver value, but they're not convinced that that value is actually good enough and it's better than their next best alternative. And I would even argue here that this is the main reason why you might be only having a price conversation and not a value conversation with that procurement professional on your customer side. And let me, give you some statistics to support actually that very point that I'm making here. We're assessing, procurement capabilities on a regular basis, and others do that as well. And here's an overview of that assessment on what, the buyer's capabilities actually are out there. And we bring in 2 dimensions here. One dimension is how well does the buyer know their own business? And the other dimension is how well do they know supplier capability and how well can they link the supplier capability to the business needs that they have internally. And based on that, you can cluster procurement organizations into 3 distinct buckets. One is obviously the technical guys that have very little knowledge about their own business needs and very little knowledge about your supply capability. These guys are technical, they will always stay technical. And for them, quite honestly, they will not be able to understand what value you deliver to the business. So probably with them, you will always have a pricing conversation. But the rest, around about 80%, they do understand. They're very capable to understand what value you provide, but probably they're not convinced. Probably you haven't supported them enough to make the case internally for the value that you're trying to sell. So they need help, support to internally defend the business case of the value that you're trying to deliver. And if they are not feeling certain about it, if they're not feeling equipped to defend your value internally, well, guess what they're doing? They fall back into something easier to converse with you about, which is price. But here's a but, because I've obviously been talking now for 10 minutes or so that price is not so important for the buyer, but there is some exceptions, and I would like to address those with you as well. So the buyer focuses on these 4 focus areas, and risk, benefits, cost all go above price. But there is an issue, and that is that price is the easiest KPI for me to deliver against, right? Let me tell you why that is. So price, or the conversation around reducing your price, is just a conversation that I'm having with you, and nobody else is involved in that necessarily. I don't need to go back to my internal stakeholders. I don't need to have any resources. It's just a conversation between supplier and customer to understand if there's some value that can be had by reducing the price. So there's a gravitational pull for me as the buyer to always fall back and resort back to that, especially if I am not convinced that what you have put in front of me with regards to risk, benefits, and costs actually stack up. If you haven't equipped me with arguments that I can use in front of my manager, my peers, my stakeholders on why that benefit that you've claimed to be very valuable is actually implementable at all. Price is something very tangible. It can be delivered in the here and now. A supply assurance initiative that I'm doing with you, which might be very valuable, might only materialize in a couple of years from now. So you see that there's a gravitational pull that you need to take into account when it comes to price. How to address that is to know your buyer very well. To know your buyer, how well they actually versed in making the case internally. You want to support your buyer here, to equip them with the arguments, with a business case, to go back to their internal teams, to discuss why your value is actually something worth investigating. You want to support them to project manage, to connect the dots, to connect them with the internal stakeholders, to have that conversation why your value adding item should be actually worked on and why you're offering more value than just a low price. So keep this in mind. There's a gravitational pull that I'm lazy in the end of the day as a buyer. I'm always falling back onto something that I can deliver myself. I need help and support from you. You need to equip me on how I can make the case internally for anything that goes above and beyond my area of responsibility, which is, cost reduction, benefits, and risk. These are all items that include probably help from other functions that I need to deliver those value items. Another reason why the buyer might be inclined to focus more on price is you, right? You might know that, not every supplier is created equal, right? We as buyers and procurement community cluster you into different categories. You might be a non-critical supplier, you might be a strategic supplier to me, a bottleneck supplier, or you might be a financial competitive supplier to me. So we cluster you into these 4 different buckets, and depending upon which cluster you fall into, I might change my priorities. I don't need to deliver a lot of value with regards to risk and benefits and cost with every single supplier. I'm being very selective with what projects I work with what supplier. So it might well be that you might, a supplier A here on the right, where I talk a lot about how can you, create value with us by addressing the risk that we see in the supply market, in your supply chains. And price is probably not a priority for me at all, but you could also be supplier B there on the left, where it's the complete opposite, where I might have 20 different options in the market to replace you with. So why should I talk a lot about, risk initiatives with you? I will be probably focusing only price. So your insights about how the buyer's clustering you, how they see the relationship with you, helps you a lot on how you selling value to them. If you just copy paste your value proposition from one customer to the other, assuming that everybody is always focusing on risk and benefits first, well, you probably will fail, because your customer and their buyer will think that you haven't really understood the reality well, and they will by default fall back to price instead of anything else that you have to offer. Lastly, and something that is pretty obvious, I hope, for everyone, is business goals. So what the company, your customer's company, is pursuing will influence also the buyer's priorities with regards to risk, benefits, cost, and price. But it will not upend it, right? We can bucket every business goals of your customer into 3 distinct sections: efficiency, growth, risk, and compliance. This is what your customers want to accomplish in their respective markets. That's what their company goals are all about. And the priorities might change a little bit and shift, and that might have an influence on how I, as the buyer, need to deliver value and cater to my respective scorecard. But it will not upend it. You will never see a scenario where risk is completely, in the background, and price is going to be number one. There will be some adjustment based on the business goals that have been set by the CEO, but they will not completely change what my procurement scorecard is looking like. Okay, so we talked a lot about now what the buyer is all about. We've created an understanding that price is, yes, one item that they need to talk about, but it's not their priority number one. There's many other things that they contemplate about when they select you as their supplier. So we want to look into value now. How do we express value? Do we sell value in the right way to these procurement professionals? And I would like us to, take a step back first to, get a better understanding what the term value actually stands for. And let's take a quick example from our private lives. How do we define value as end consumers that we all are, right? And let's use this very simple example here on how we define value between different food options that is put in front of us. I mean, do you value the Big Mac for $5.90 more than the lobster dish at $35.90, right? Obviously, there's a different way on how we define what value really is. It's very subjective. It's comparative. It depends really on the situation potentially that we're in, right? Imagine you're on the highway, you're just coming back from the beach, and you have your children, in the back, and you just want to get home, and everybody's hungry and cranky. Obviously, maybe the attractiveness of having a quick burger is probably higher, more valuable to you than sitting down and having a 2-hour meal in a fancy restaurant. So what is valuable to us is dependent on the situation that we're in, on our personal preferences. And it's very relative as well, right? Probably some of you will be making the case that they prefer the burger over the lobster, and the other way around. So value is something very difficult to grasp. At the same time, though, what we all do subconsciously is to plug in the data and information that we have into a formula, a value formula. And it goes the following. Value is just 2 simple things that come together here, namely the benefits that you see and the option that is put in front of you, and how much you care about the benefits that option delivers to you, minus the price that you have to pay. That is the quick assessment that you do whenever you talk about making a decision between option A or option B, right? And it's very important to remember here that value is always relative. You always compare it to something else. It's never insular that you just say, well, this has a lot of value. It's always, this has a lot of value compared to the alternative that you have at your fingertips. So this is how we go about value in a private context. And in business and B2B, on how your customer says value is very similar. It's a little bit more granular, but effectively they follow the same formula and the same approach. Customer value is effectively them assessing the total benefits that they see in engaging with you, multiplied by how much they care about these benefits that you have to offer, minus the price that they have to pay, plus, and this is very important, plus the costs that they incur doing business with you, plus the risks that they see in engaging in a business relationship with you. And always compared to the options that they have or alternatives that they have available to them. Now, the savvy amongst you will have noticed, wait a minute, Jens. We've just talked about benefits, price, cost, and risk, right? Yes, exactly. We've talked about that because it's exactly the focus areas that your buyers are focusing on to deliver their scorecard, right? So procurement can be your perfect value merchant because they are applying the levers that are derived from that value formula. What they're doing day in, day out is comparing supplier value from supplier A to supplier B, compare that value and assess which supplier solution they should be going for by using the formula benefits times how much they care minus price, cost, and risk. So procurement is the perfect value merchant, the perfect enabler for you to sell on a value basis. Now, coming back to your initial question, because you might still not be convinced to say, okay, Jens, I get it, right? There is a link between the scorecard and this value formula, but why is my buyer still only convinced to talk about price with me? So we need to be looking into another area that we haven't yet touched on, namely how do you sell value to your customer? How do you sell value to that procurement professional? And we need to be looking into the value proposals that you submit to your customers. And I just want to, throw out a example value proposal here to you. I think everybody's, following the same schematic or the same approach to value propositions. So you normally start with, outlining what is the customer situation. So description of the key problem or the main opportunity the customer has. That's normally how suppliers approach customers when they have or want to discuss a value proposition, defining this is the situation that you're in, customer, this is your problem, or this is the opportunity that we see in your respective market. And then you continue with outlining the solution. Well, here is what we have to offer customer, and this is how our solution can help you address that problem that we've identified in the market or leverage that opportunity that we've identified. You then go along and say, well, these are the value attributes, right? The value drivers that we can offer. And here's just some examples that you might be putting into your value proposal, showcasing to your customer all the value that you create if they apply your solution to address the problem or opportunity. And then obviously you close out with the price and the volumes that you're expecting, right? So this is normally how you create your value proposition. And in general, this is the right setup. I'm not saying that this is wrong. This is a good setup on how you should be talking about your value with your customer. But there are certain flaws because oftentimes suppliers and sales managers forget to put this value proposition into context with the value formula that we just talked about. And let's start with the first two items, and these are critical and crucial because mostly the customer situation and your solution do not really care about how much your customer cares, right? Most value propositions that I have seen from suppliers and sales managers miraculously talk about the problem that is solved with the solution that they have to offer. The product that they're selling miraculously fits pretty much into the problem that they claim the customer has. And this is something obviously that is readily spotted, especially by a trained procurement professional. And if I see that as the buyer, that you're talking about something that is actually not really important to me, I probably dismiss very quickly anything that goes beyond just price. Because I'm thinking, okay, you're talking about benefits here, you're talking about problems that is not really a problem. You make it a problem, but it's not really a problem to me. So why would I talk about benefits and value with you if I can just do something very quickly, namely either dismiss your offer or just quickly negotiate something because I know that's potentially where the only value lies with you. So not knowing really what your customer's problem is and putting that into context then on how you can solve that main problem or opportunity is the main issue that I see with many value propositions. The other problem is, and that is even more common than the previous one, is that you put in too many benefits in front of the customer. So you pretty much say everything and anything that you do or consider as valuable, you share that with your customer in the hope that something will stick. It's a so-called spaghetti tactics, right? You throw the spaghettis at the wall and hope something will stick. And that is also something that is off turning to your customer and the procurement professional because you pretty much give them some homework there, some homework for them to decide what is actually a benefit to them, what could be of value to them. Is it the sustainability angle? Is it this supply chain? Is it, that the production footprint that you have? Is it that you spend 3% on R&D? What is it that is really value? What is really a benefit that I care about? You leave void or blank and let me decide on what I should be doing. And again, I have this gravitational pull to go towards price. If you put a lot of homework on my desk with your value proposition, I readily might dismiss that if I'm not clearly see what is the benefit of, engaging with you. And if it's not supporting how much I care, I will default back onto price. The other issue here, obviously, is that in this value proposition, you have not explained, is your value, greater than my current setup or greater than the alternative that I have? And that is a big outage as well, right? Because as we said early on, and as we experience ourselves in the private context, value is always, compared to something else. And if you're not addressing what that something else is, well, I will. And if you want to leave it to me, probably I will always have the tendency to consider what I have as more valuable as something that I could have but don't know what it is. And you as a new supplier or coming with a new solution is always something that I might be slightly afraid of, because it might incur more cost, it might incur more risk, and that's the reason why I might not consider your solution as more valuable than as what I have currently. Okay, so the issue really is with these value proposition is that your total benefits or the list of your benefits is confusing me. The problem with your value proposition is that probably you focus on a problem or opportunity that is not the key or the main opportunity and problem that is top of mind for me, which is off-putting. And what you've completely ignored in this value proposition is one of my main KPIs, one of the main focus areas for me as a buyer, namely cost and risk. How much does it cost to engage with you as a new supplier? I might need to invest into training. I might need to change tooling. I might need to, put you into our ERP system. So there's a lot of administrative steps to get you in, which incur costs and which you haven't addressed in the value proposition. There might be also a lot of risk involved. Again, I might have a supplier currently that has a lot of issues and has a lot of supply outages, but at least I know what they're good at and what they're not so good at. I don't know how you're dealing with supply problems. So you haven't addressed that in the value proposition as well, which is obviously a problem, because if I'm not equipped with this information, I will fall back into the only option that I have, or the only value attribute, quite honestly, that I'm interested to talk about, which is price. So this is the reason why, despite all the setup of the buyer being willing to talk and converse about value, the buyer needing to talk about other value items than price to drive their career and secure their job, they fall back into price because they're confused. They think you're not focusing on the right things, and then you're ignoring some of the biggest items on their table. So we obviously want to, in the remaining time, provide you with a little insight here on how you can turn that conversation from price to other value items. And we obviously cannot, in this 1 hour webinar, cover everything. So I would like to focus on cost and risk, which are some of the most important elements for your buyer. Okay, so cost. Let's start with that. There's a lot of different elements that we could talk about with regards to cost. I mentioned some early on. When you're a new supplier, there's a lot of initial costs, setup costs that your customer will incur. But we also could talk about, or you could talk about in your value proposal around total cost of ownership or total cost in use. Some of you might be familiar with it. I just give you a quick example to get everybody on the same page what I mean by that. A concept that your procurement community is very familiar with, very much interested in, and very much considering as a value item that they want to pursue. So let me give you an example to get everybody on the same page. Let's assume for the moment you're producing this beautiful tool here, this machinery part, and it costs $15. And let's assume as well that you have a competitor. Maybe that's the incumbent supplier that is supplying currently to your customer that sells the same tool for $10. So if we just have a pricing conversation, it's fairly obvious that I would go with the competitor because they offer your tool at 30% less to what you have as a price tag there. But then you could make the total cost of ownership or total cost in use calculation or case here, right? You could say, well, Jens, look, our tool, if you apply it and use it in your machines yourself, we can guarantee you a higher reliability, longer uptime. You will use less energy, less lubrication, et cetera, et cetera. So overall, the total cost in use over a year's time will be $57 compared to the competitor, who is obviously the reverse, lower reliability, less uptime, longer installation time, increased inventory, will incur a cost of $87.25, which is a cost reduction of $30.25. So this could make a good case saying, hey, yes, in the here and now, procurement professional, you have to pay 30% more for our solution, right? But over time, you will be saving $30.25. So on face value, amazing, right? Let me ask you the question. What is the problem with TCO for the buyer? What is the problem with what I just presented to you if you were to present that to your buyer tomorrow? Put it into chat if you have an idea what the problem could be. Yeah, there's some good points coming up here. TCO was quite low on the list. Is it guaranteed? Verifying your assumptions and building a strong business case. He's not sure about future figures. You're all going into the right direction. Look, the business case was already quite good. I loved it. Many suppliers, just this slide alone, is something that you rarely see, right? Many value propositions go on with saying, hey, we will be saving you costs. Just trust us, right? This is already something where I feel, whoa, somebody has put some brain power behind it and actually put together some numbers that I can at least look into. But there's problems with this, and some of you alluded to that already. Data accuracy, it starts with that. All your buyers are very cynical. They're not trusting you. So immediately I will be jumping onto, where does this data come from? And there you want to be transparent. Is it your own data? So have you used this tool onto your machines? So is that saving based on your historic, data that you've gathered? Is it customer data? So have you used this on our machine? Have you maybe had access to our machine? Do you really know what our setup was? Have you maybe run a trial in a little factory somewhere that I wasn't aware of, and you can prove that this is actually going to happen? Is this just a business case that you present to me that maybe you've done with some other customer? Or is it generic data, some assumption that you're making? All of which is okay. I just want to know about it, right? I just want to know. I want you to be transparent. Why do I want to know about it? Because as soon as I put this cost value item, this total cost of ownership value item, forward internally, I will be getting exactly the same question. And if I'm not equipped to answer it, well, guess what? It will be immediately dismissed, right? And again, I might not be the best one communicating. I might not be the best to connect it internally. I need your help to sell this internally. It comes back to what we discussed earlier. You need to equip your buyer with the right argument so that they can make the case for you and for this particular total cost of ownership case. The assumption that you're making behind it, right? There's certain assumptions, obviously, that you make that I want to be aware of. Timelines, and somebody mentioned that in the chat as well. When will I see the benefits? So obviously, a $5 reduction in price, I can deliver today, right? I can put this into my scorecard today. This total cost of use or ownership reduction will materialize over a 12-month period. And how tangible is that really? And also, why should we be doing it now? This is one of the most important items most suppliers don't answer. Why should we be doing it now? Because obviously we have opportunity costs and opportunity losses here. We have only so many resources internally to implement these changes. And why should they be working on this project and not on something else? And not supplying me with that explanation leaves me again in the dark. You expect me as the buyer to have the conversation with my manager why we should be working on your project and not on some other supplier's project or some internal project. So again, you leave the buyer on their own. Volume dependent as well. If we stop that machine tomorrow, well, there will be zero savings, but just a higher price for the spare part that I had to pay. Stakeholders engagement is needed, right? I obviously need to talk, to internal people in some production sites to make them aware that we want to run this test or that we want to make the change. How do I do that? How can you help me with that? There's also cost elements that you have not mentioned here, namely, probably by changing this tool that is currently running very well, we obviously need to schedule in some downtime, which is lost production, which is then maybe causing some issues, further down the supply chain with our customers, with the retailers, based or back to that case that we made at the outset of this webinar. Process changes, we need to retrain our people on the lines potentially on your tools. We also, how the supply chain is set up might be changing our process completely. We probably want to run some tests as well. It's good and great that you have these numbers here, and maybe you have a test case even, but we still want to test if the machine still runs the way it's supposed to be running. Does it change maybe the finished product that we're producing? Is it end consumer noticeable, yes or no? Maybe we want to run an end consumer test based on this different machine setup. Also, we might need some internal resources, not only the guys that put the machine part into the machine, right? The guys on the line, but we need to have some project management oversight here that this is actually being implemented. So this drives cost as well. And obviously, it does incur more risk, which you want to address. Is you potentially new suppliers, a new supply chain, new people, everything could go wrong. So the point that I'm trying to make here, this case is great. TCO is something that your buyer wants to talk about. But again, you need to equip them with the right information, with the right business case, so that they can have that, internal conversation, adequate internal conversation to convince stakeholders to go down that route to engage with you. And most suppliers exactly miss that trick. So what does need to happen? How to TCO, how to TCU? So how to, make the cost case with the buyer on the customer side? Well, a succinct business case is required. The slide that I've shown you, if you add a business case next to it that has all the arguments on how the buyer can sell it internally, is the prerequisite that you need to come up with. It shouldn't be something that I ask you to do. It should be coming with your value proposition. You need to obviously clearly outline the cost benefits, time base, when will we get what, and the cost associated with the product, with the project, risk assessment, and what if clearly. Tell me clearly, because I will be asked internally, what if this machine part is not available on day one? What if that machine part fails in hour one? What if we have to retool and go back to the old machine part? What are we going to do and how are we going to do it? These are all questions I'm going to be asked. And again, if I'm motivated as the buyer, if I'm focused and I really believe in you, if I really trust you, I'll be answering these questions, no problem. But most of your customers and their procurement professionals don't yet trust you. You have not built that relationship. They don't really want to do that extra work. So they're getting pulled back into price and don't want to talk about value here, which is the cost component of value. And obviously the resources required that we need to have, and the timelines and clear owners. Who's going to do what, right? Who's going to connecting the dots? Will you bring together the stakeholders and kick off that project? Can you tell me who these stakeholders are? Don't assume that a procurement person, maybe somewhere in a headquarters, will know who that plant manager in Mexico is that we need to get involved to get some downtime to replace your machinery part. So you want to think out of the box to really make this proposition, which has value, really land with your buyer. Okay. I know that there's quite some questions that came in, I think, but Ivan will be taking care of that, and we're addressing them later on. I just want to, before we go to Q&A, deal with another point that is always being dismissed, but is super crucial, which is risk. Again, we want to obviously have that conversation no longer based solely on price. We want to make sure that we address the key, key issues that are on your buyer's minds. And cost, we just talked, but risk is a very important element. And when I talk about risk, or when the procurement person on your customer side talk about risk, they talk about this, right? You might remember this, 2021 is an example that I use often. So if you've been in previous webinars, you might have seen that slide before, that picture before, is that famous or infamous container ship stuck in the Suez Canal in 2021, which led to major supply chain disruptions around the globe, right? If you can't remember the story, read it up. It's a very fascinating business case. But what it's shown to the procurement community and supply chain community in the world is our supply chains are at risk, right? And especially CEOs have realized, whoa, our supply chain might be more fragile than we want to believe. So every procurement person is even more incentivized to look into this very, very carefully and very diligently with the suppliers. So this is the risk that you want to address, is this complete disaster risk that I would like to hear from you and how you're going to manage it. Well, what you normally do in your value proposals is the following, and I've seen it so many times, and it's disappointing, quite frankly, because what you do is just tell me, well, we are the leader in this. We haven't done this since yesterday. We do this for 50, 100, 120 years. Jens, trust us. We have this in hand. We will manage this very, very well. This is just not good enough. We have a team of experts that will do that. So don't worry, Jens, everything is going to be in order. What you also will say in these value proposals is, well, Jens, we have 6 months worth of stock on site for you. So don't worry, even if a chip gets stuck or if our production site burns down, we still have 6 months worth of stock for you. We have 10 production sites around the world. We have 99% uptime. Our SLAs are 90% on time in full with all customers. We can agree on penalties even if you're very concerned, Jens. So what's really the problem here? Let me ask you again, and maybe put that into chat. Why is this not good enough? Why is this not good enough for the buyer that you're interacting with? Let me tell you, because I would like to hear what you're going to be doing in that 1% that you don't have uptime. Remember the case that I made earlier. Why am I losing my job? I'm losing my job because in that 1% of times where you haven't delivered a truck to my door tailgate, to the factory, where we couldn't unload your stuff, we couldn't put it into our product, we couldn't ship it to Walmart, and guess what? They delisted us. We losing market share, and I'm going to be the first one out the door. And I want to hear from you, what are you going to be doing in that 1% of the time? Also on stock, a lot of suppliers say that we have 6 months worth of stock, but in a critical situation, how will you allocate that volume to your customers? Will you give me preference? I know that you're working with a major competitor of ours. Maybe you have a better relationship with them. Will you give them preference? So how is that stock split going to happen? And then also the last thing on penalty, something that sometimes salespeople chip away. Hey, look, we can put a 10,000 penalty on this, $10,000, let's say, for 1 day of delayed shipment, whatever it is. Oh, great. But if I have a 2 billion market share at risk, 10,000 doesn't do the deal. I don't want to sue you on penalties. This is not what I'm after. It's not driving the right behavior necessarily versus the risk that I'm running if you're not supplying. So how can we circumvent this? What I would like to hear from you, and I would like to hear that from you in your value proposition and not you waiting until I ask you for this. This should be part of the value proposition because this is top of mind for me as the buyer. What will you do on day one when something really goes wrong? How will you make sure that we always get our supply? How will you allocate volumes? Be open and honest to say, look, we have a major relationship with your competitor. And you know what? It's going to be difficult for us. We give them preference always, and whatever's left over, that's what you're going to have. At least I know then what's going to happen, because I will always assume worst case if you don't share anything with me. This is how quickly we can resume production. This is our plan to get back online. So this is the topic about risk, and I know we're getting close to the hour, guys, and I want to leave some time for some questions. I know that there's some questions out there already. But what we've covered here is, and what I wanted to relay to you, is to say yes, procurement can be your value merchant. And we've seen it with the connection of the general value equation and what KPIs the buyers are assessed against. Is a one-to-one relationship. What buyers do day in, day out is to bring in value from the supplier side into their organization. You just want to make sure that you understand your buyers well enough so that you can address their respective focus area in the best way possible in the value proposal that you put in front of them. So to summarize, to sell value requires you to be able to immerse yourself into your customer's environment well, to put yourself into your buyer's shoes and to understand what is important to them. Many value propositions that I've seen in my career have failed on exactly that. They haven't addressed everything that is in that value formula. They haven't made clear what's important to the buyer and the customer. They have put in too many benefits that are unrelated to that business relationship. They haven't talked about risk. They haven't talked about cost. Well, guess what I did as a buyer when you came into my meeting room? I only pressured you on price. And I don't want you to do that as well. If you want to learn more about that, about us, and quite frankly, about this topic, about how to make your buyer a value merchant, please feel free to download our white paper on this. All the graphs that I've shown you today are also available there. So please feel free to download it. And I would like to open the floor now for some questions that we might have received. So let me bring back in Ivan there in the background. Have we received any questions there?
Hi, Jens. Yeah, there was 2 questions in the chat that I would like to first bring out, both boil down to the difference between price and cost from the perspective of buyer. This is how I understood it.
All right, okay. So price is your price tag. Let's bring it back to that example that I made with this tool, right? The machine part, $10 versus $15, that's the price. And I compare you based on that, that there's this $5 differential. That's the price that we're talking about. And then I compare the price that I have budgeted for. If, for instance, I budgeted this machine part to cost $9, and both you and the competitor are 10 and 15, obviously both of you offered me prices that are above my budget, right? But if I budgeted for this machine part, let's say 12, and you come in at 10, and competitor comes in at 15, well, guess what? The 12 might be already success for me because I budgeted obviously at a higher price point. You increase your price from 10 to 12, which is still, a differential of 3 between 15 and 12, which I can bank as a saving. So this is the whole price saving conversation. Cost is all about, well, how much does it cost to do business with you, right? Either the efforts that we need to employ to transact, the effort that we have to, send you invoices, the cost that we incur by using your material, recycling your material. These are all cost elements, right? How costly are the supply chains? How much managerial oversight is required for that supplier? Do you need a lot of hand-holding or not? These are all cost elements that are being taken into account. So that's the differential between price and cost.
Amazing. Amazing, Jens. Thanks. Do we have time for more questions?
Yeah, let's go for one more question then.
Okay, so how does supplier clustering influence the buyer's KPIs?
Say that one more time.
How does supplier clustering influence the buyer's KPIs?
Yeah, so that's something that we said obviously at the outset, right? That not every supplier is created equal. Meaning I, as the procurement professional, will have made a clear decision if I see you as a strategic supplier, as a bottleneck supplier, as a non-competitive supplier, or as a non-critical supplier, or as a commercially competitive supplier, right? So these are the 4 buckets that procurement professionals think in. And before you even go out and draft a value proposition, you want to know in what cluster you fall, right? Even if you don't agree with that cluster, that doesn't matter. You just want to see from your customer's point of view, from the buyer's point of view, where do I fall into? Because that will tell you a lot on where their priorities are, on what focus areas they really want to have a conversation with you about. Because that could mean that maybe with some that I consider non-critical, price might be front and center, with regards to the conversation. Whilst if I see you more strategic, then probably it's more about maybe cost, risk, benefits predominantly that I want to have a conversation with you. That does not mean that you cannot get out of these clusters, but you need to first understand where are you at, what is then important based on that assessment for the buyer, and what steps can you take in your value proposition to change that perception of the buyer from maybe becoming more of a strategic supplier versus a non-critical supplier that you currently are in the eyes of the procurement professional. So to make a long story short, it's a bit of a broader topic. Long story short is the buyer perception of you and how they see the relationship with you will determine what their priorities are. We've shown you here that in general, the buyer thinks about risk, thinks about benefits, cost, and then price. If you, a supplier that is not so critical to them, this might flip. So you want to be aware of what is happening. The buyer does not need to address all their focus areas with all suppliers. Okay, we're coming close to the hour. I want to be respectful of your time. I know there's more questions there in the chat as well. Maybe some of them I will put into the follow-up email that I'm going to be sending you. First of all, everyone, thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate that you spent this Wednesday afternoon for me with us. Hopefully we could explain you a little bit on how you can make your procurement professional a value merchant. If you want to learn more, if you may be interested in a training of ours, don't hesitate to contact us. It would be great to see you soon or in one of our future webinars. Have a good afternoon, a good rest of your day. Speak soon and take care. Bye-bye.